I met Devin Nunes in early 2011. He was on two of the most significant committees in Congress, the Committee on Ways and Means and the Select Committee on Intelligence. He was not yet a household name, but he was a very important member of Congress from the day I met him. He was important in the aftermath of 4 Americans being killed in Libya. He was one of the members of Congress who pushed the hardest and the longest to get the information for the family and friends of those killed and for those Americans who survived. Devin was someone those of us who worked with him knew of and respected greatly on intelligence and national security matters, but he was not yet a household name. And all of that changed in 2017. Devin, there's an old saying that hindsight is 20/20, and there's another old saying, I wish I knew then what I know now. As we sit here in May of 2020, there are lots of things that have come into very clear focus. I hope we can touch on where we are, but I also want us to walk the listener through how we got here. So it's January 2017. President Trump's won the presidency, is about to be inaugurated. There are media reports about Russian interference, something called a dossier. There are leaks about phone calls. There's this new term unmasking, and there's something about an ICA. Let's start with the ICA. What was it and how is it relevant?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Congratulations on your new podcast. And, I've found podcasts. I've been doing one now for about a year and a half. I find them very useful, and I do it similar to yours. I just like to interview people, interesting people about interesting topics. Not that I'm very interesting, but I'm glad that you're doing one, and congratulations. And of course, we all miss you in Washington and in Congress, but I know you probably don't miss us very much.
I miss you, but not it. What's the name of your podcast for folks that want to check it out?
It's really clever. It's really a really clever design podcast. It's called the Devin Nunes Podcast.
How did you come up with that?
It took a long time. I spelled my name wrong the first couple times, but we eventually got it right. So, well, hey, let me just start out by saying also that the work that you did to help us in the beginning of this Russia hoax, you and Tom Rooney, if you remember back to 2016 after the election. So this was right before you got put on the Intelligence Committee, but thank God you did get put on in 2017 because at that point, we really didn't have any lawyers. We had nobody from the Judiciary Committee, and that's really critical, especially what we went into in 2017, because traditionally the Intelligence Committee was one of the only places that was bipartisan. Nobody really knew what we did, and one would argue because it's an oxymoron to have an Intelligence Committee in Congress. But more than that, though, Trey, I remember when you came on the committee, you said, you came off of the Benghazi investigation. It was a very partisan, and you wanted to actually feel like you were doing something that mattered. It mattered to national security. You wanted to get out of the limelight to some degree and be in a position where you were going to be in a spot where you could just participate in something that's bipartisan and something that made you feel like you were getting your making that commute to Washington, D.C. and actually getting something done. So I remember when you got put on, and little did we know in 2016 after the election that we were going to end up just weeks later when you came on the committee, how nutty it was going to get. And I would just say this, I always start out with this, that the House Republicans had been very critical of the Obama administration and their handling of Russia. Dating back to 2014, that was when you initially had the shooting down of an airliner in Ukraine. You had the annexation of Crimea by the Russians. And you just follow that with the Iran nuclear deal that clearly Obama was trying to work with the Russians on that. You had the hot mic incident where Barack Obama leans over to then the Prime Minister Medvedev, even though Putin was still really running the country, and says, tell Vladimir, I got to wait till I get till after the election. That was back in 2012. We can go into the Hillary Clinton reset button. So let's just take all of that in total. But we are critical because we, House Republicans and the Senate Intelligence Committee, we're sending money to the Obama administration, hoping that they're going to use this money to rebuild some of our intelligence capability that we had lost after the Cold War. Because after the Cold War, everybody thought, well, relations were gonna thaw out, and we would have Vladimir Putin was going to lead and transition Russia into something that would resemble a democracy. Clinton got it wrong. George W. Bush got it wrong. Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State under Barack Obama got it wrong. And it was, ironically, Donald Trump's position throughout 2016 was no different whatsoever from the three previous administrations. So into 2016 happens. You may remember Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook and Obama come out and say, well, this happened because of fake news. It wasn't that Hillary Clinton had totally botched what had happened in Benghazi. It wasn't that she was an unlikable person. It wasn't that maybe people were tired of the Clintons and tired of same old. It was that Donald Trump was utilizing Facebook, Twitter, and all these social media capabilities to generate and populate fake news out to the public. He was the creator of fake news. Well, that lasted for a whole 2 weeks before President Trump turned around at press conferences. Actually, no, I like this term fake news. You guys are fake news. So I don't know if you remember all of that, Trey. That all occurs like in November of 2016. And then out of nowhere, we come back to, we get a briefing. It's no shock to us. Now, people act like this is news, that Vladimir Putin and Russia would be involved and meddle in an election. This is not news. For those of us in the intelligence world, we follow that all over the globe. We know exactly, not maybe precisely everything they do, but we watch what Russia and China and Iran and other nations and how they mess around with elections. Very common. And in fact, it's very common for dating back to the Soviet Union time for the Russians to be involved in our election. So, and lo and behold, we get a post-election presentation, maybe, I don't know, a couple weeks after the election in 2016. Trey, totally normal. You weren't in there for that. You weren't in there for that briefing. Totally normal, nothing unusual. Yeah, Russians were sowing discord. Almost so when you look back to that presentation, they were actually trying to cover up what they had been doing. When you really go back and look at the transcripts, because there were people in that room from the FBI and the CIA that clearly knew that what they were doing to the Trump campaign. And the fact of the matter was, there were no intelligence products whatsoever, other than the stuff that the Clinton campaign had paid for, the so-called dossier. That was the only intelligence they had. And of course, they didn't present it to us after that election because they were trying to make this go away. And a lot of people forget what I call the Halloween leak story. So on Halloween 2016, a story run that is clearly a leak at the highest level that says, yeah, we FBI, we're good guys. We really looked at all this Trump collusion stuff that the Clinton campaign and Isikoff and all these other reporters have been writing about. But here it is in the Washington Post. Finally, they talk about it. They leak classified information, right? The existence of an investigation would clearly be classified. And they said, yeah, we looked at the Trump campaign, but we didn't find anything. Now, I look back at that and say there were people within the FBI who believed Clinton was going to win. They knew what they were doing was wrong. And they were trying to do let's erase the chalkboard, right? Let's just erase what's been going on here. Let's get this out. Washington Post, the left-wing paper of record, along with the other mainstream media locations. And let's just give them classified information that shows we looked, we found nothing, Clinton's going to win. Let's just make this all go away because we really screwed up. And I think that was probably a movement at that time when I look back, Trey, of the McCabe folks trying to differentiate themselves from the Comey cabal. Because if you remember, Comey completely torched himself in any chance.
For the full podcast, go to foxnewspodcast.com.